Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're tackling one of the absolute most important and honestly most exciting aspects of photography and cinematography, camera lenses. You know, it's kind of funny. People will literally drop thousands of dollars upgrading their camera bodies just to get the latest sensor, but the true magic, that actually lives inside the glass they put in front of it. So today, we're not just looking at lenses as technical accessories. We're going to explore how they are profound narrative devices. They're the actual tools that shape emotion and build the entire perspective of your story.
So, to kick things off, imagine photographing the exact same person. They don't move a single inch, the lighting in the room stays exactly the same, but the emotional impact and the entire feeling of the image completely shifts, just by swapping out the lens. With one lens, they look like a distant, totally unapproachable stranger. But swap the glass, and suddenly they feel like your best friend sitting right across the table from you sharing a secret. Crazy, right? How is that even possible? Well, let's look at exactly what happens when we move through a few different lenses.
First up, the wide lens. The second you put a wide lens on your camera, the world just instantly feels massive. It captures a huge amount of the environment, stretching the background out and making the space feel incredibly large and dramatic. It gives you this tremendous sense of scale, where nearby objects command total attention. If you've ever looked at a real estate listing and wondered how a tiny 80-square-foot bedroom somehow looks like a cavernous dining hall, well, you've witnessed the magic of a wide lens. It drastically exaggerates the space.
But then, let's say we swap that out for a standard lens. Notice how the feeling totally changes. All of that dramatic, stretched-out distortion, it vanishes completely. The image suddenly feels grounded, deeply natural, and, well, familiar. It looks almost exactly like the perspective of normal human vision. So instead of a sweeping, dramatic landscape, it places the audience right there in the room, making everything feel comfortable and true to life.
Finally, we switch over to a telephoto lens, and the transformation here is absolutely striking. The telephoto drastically isolates our subject. The background just melts away into this beautiful soft blur and compresses forward, which lets us manufacture instant intimacy. It feels highly emotional and strikingly close. So this quick little sequence really proves a massive point. Lenses don't just capture a scene. They literally shape the audience's psychological experience of that scene.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the power of perspective, decoding focal length, the 4 essential lenses, prime versus zoom lenses, and finally, storytelling over technical specs. We are building straight from the technical foundation right up to creative mastery.
Section 1. The power of perspective. It is absolutely crucial to remember that while a camera body records the image, it's the lens that dictates what is actually seen. A camera lens is basically a tool that gathers and focuses light to control how we see space, distance, and relationships on screen. I actually love using the camera's eye analogy for this. Think of the camera body as the brain saving the memory, but the lens, that's the eye. It mimics human perception and directs our attention. By simply changing the lens, you fundamentally change the way we experience physical space and emotional distance.
Section 2. Decoding focal length.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we can put actual technical math behind all this visual magic. So let's define focal length clearly. Measured in millimeters, or mm, it determines exactly how wide or how narrow the lens sees the world. Simply put, it's the specific measurement of the camera's field of view.
Let's walk through the basic rules of those millimeters. Smaller numbers mean you see more of the scene, a much wider field of view. Larger numbers mean you see less of the scene, but they make distant subjects appear way closer to the camera. The crucial takeaway here is that focal length isn't just acting like a magnifying glass. Not at all. It's a tool that radically alters the perspective and the spatial relationships within your frame. Here's a pretty wild fact. Zooming in with your lens versus zooming in with your feet, which just means physically walking closer to your subject with a wider lens, those yield completely different backgrounds. Filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock actually famously exploited this optical physics to create the dolly zoom. It's that deeply unsettling effect where the background seems to stretch and warp while the subject stays the exact same size. That is the sheer power of focal length.
All right, Section 3. The 4 essential lenses.
Now we get to introduce the filmmaker's core toolkit. We're going to link those specific millimeter ranges we just talked about directly to their psychological impacts. First up, the wide-angle lens, which typically ranges from 14 to 35 millimeters. This captures large areas and creates a very strong sense of depth. And because it makes nearby objects appear larger than life, wide-angle lenses are absolutely perfect for sweeping landscapes, wide architectural establishing shots, and capturing really dynamic, fast-paced movement.
Next is the standard lens, sitting right around that 50mm mark.
This is your visual workhorse. It's incredibly versatile and feels totally natural for everyday storytelling. Because this specific focal length so closely mirrors human sight, it's your absolute go-to for natural-feeling conversations, documentary-style setups, and those honest, unfiltered moments.
Moving further up the millimeter scale, we get to the short telephoto lens, ranging from 70 to 135 millimeters. This one is widely considered the ultimate portrait lens. It's famous for how beautifully it flatters the human face without any of that weird ballooning distortion you can sometimes get from a wide angle. It naturally separates the subject from the background, creating these stunning, emotional close-ups. By softening and blurring out the background, it focuses the audience's attention purely on the subject's expression. It just creates a highly intimate feeling.
Finally, we reach the long telephoto, which is categorized as anything 135 millimeters and above. This lens deeply compresses perspective and brings incredibly distant subjects right up close to the viewer. If you picture that classic movie trope where, say, a detective is watching a suspect from a parked car way down the street, or someone spying through heavy binoculars, that's the exact visual flavor of a long telephoto. It makes objects appear much closer together in the frame than they actually are in physical reality, making it perfect for wildlife photography or creating really tense, observant surveillance scenes.
And this brilliantly illustrates the progression across the whole toolkit. We move from the wide angle's massive depth into the standard's conversational nature, all the way down to the short telephoto's intimate isolation, and finally the long telephoto's compressed, observant feel. It is an incredible spectrum of emotion, all neatly categorized and controlled entirely by focal length.
Section 4. Prime versus zoom lenses.
So, when setting up a shot, you basically have two primary options: prime or zoom. This is a very practical gear choice that every photographer and filmmaker has to make on set. Prime lenses have exactly one fixed focal length, like a strict 50 millimeter. If you want to change your framing with a prime, you physically have to pick up the camera and walk. Zoom lenses, on the other hand, cover a range of focal lengths, allowing you to adjust your framing seamlessly while standing in the exact same spot. Now, I do want to remind you, neither of these is universally better. The right choice depends strictly on your practical constraints on set and the specific creative needs of your project.
Section 5. Storytelling over technical specs.
This brings us to essentially our masterclass segment, where we synthesize all this technical knowledge into creative, story-driven choices. But first, let's look at a few common beginner pitfalls. Mistake number 1, believing that longer lenses are always better just because they get you closer. Mistake number 2, getting lazy and relying purely on a zoom lens instead of physically moving the camera to find a vastly superior composition. And mistake number 3, choosing a lens without considering the environment or the story you're trying to tell. So the crucial point is, before you mount any lens, always stop and ask yourself what the audience should feel in this exact moment.
You know, there's a really great saying among experienced cinematographers. They don't ask what's the sharpest lens, they ask which lens best supports the story. And honestly, that professional insight completely cements the entire theme of our explainer today. Your technical choices must always be a servant to the narrative. The technical specs, they just don't matter if the emotion isn't right.
Which brings us to the end, and I want to leave you with this provocative thought. What will your next lens choice say about your story? I want to thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. I really hope this structured breakdown has demystified focal lengths for you and left you totally inspired to make highly deliberate, emotionally engaging visual choices the next time you pick up a camera. Keep learning, keep framing, and I'll see you next time.